In this video, we're going to be talking about working with resistive clients. I'm Peggy Cooney. I'm a trainer coach for the Northern Training Academy at UC Davis.
And I'm Larry Picard, and I'm an instructor also at the Northern California Training Academy. So who are resistive clients? I think you all know who they are, right? Many times there are people who suffer from alcoholism, from drug addiction. They may be homeless as a result of those problems, or they may be homeless in general and might be related to them, of course, having a serious mental illness, and they're not taking their meds or whatever, they're not getting treatment. Might also include, of course, very common in APS, hoarders, people who are hoarding. Clients that, of course, are also being unduly influenced, can be also resistive because they're fearful. They're afraid, yeah.
Very good.
And last but not least, of course, people suffering from dementia, and many of our clients are, of course. And they fall into that category of being self-neglecting.
Right.
So they range all the way from those who won't respond to any contact whatsoever to those who cooperate because they feel like, they have no choice.
If you've been in APS for any amount of time, you have actually worked with several of these kinds of resistive clients, right,
Do you have
Larry?
some examples?
Sure. So we have an 87-year-old widow has been living alone for several years and been suffering from gradual escalation of dementia, becoming increasingly unable to care for herself, but she refuses to leave her home.
Many of them agoraphobic, right? Yeah, really afraid to
And
leave.
again, we look at trying to even look at some of the context that happens in. Maybe they're afraid of falling, maybe they've fallen before. We have a 60-year-old alcoholic who's suffering from severe complications of chronic alcoholism and has complicated circulatory problems with a bad infection in his legs. Numerous attempts have been made to get him care, but he remains resistant.
Right.
Definitely one that I've had, a 68-year-old woman has over 60 cats living in her home. She refuses to get rid of the cats, and many are suffering and dying in her home.
And she feels like she's doing a service, right? By taking care of all
She
this.
feels like she is a rescue center.
Right.
A 42-year-old developmentally delayed client who has developed a financially exploitive relationship with a couple who are addicted to drugs. They've taken most of his money, and he refuses to form other friendships that are not exploitive.
Yeah, and this client, met this couple at a shelter workshop.
Right.
And just ended up being in this very exploitive relationship.
Right.
Yeah.
It's so sad.
Yes.
And then cases like a 75-year-old woman who's addicted to opiates, which again is kind of our national epidemic now, and attempts to detox her have failed because she just refuses treatment.
Yeah. So really now we'll turn to, if you will, the Manual of Policies and Procedures, that thing that you read every Saturday night when you're bored and want to read something exciting.
And you have insomnia.
Exactly. The goal of APS is really to provide, of course, APS services to elders and dependent adults who are unable to protect their own interests or to care for themselves. So, that really lies at the heart of what we do. APS program is also there to prevent and remedy abuse, of course, neglect and exploitation, who have been harmed or are at risk of harm. And this really is a conundrum, right? It's an issue for us because we know that certain people are headed down a path that's going to lead to eventual harm. And how can we help them to not take that route? That's often really very difficult, especially when they're resistive to our interventions. And then whenever possible, APS program, the policies and procedures say that the APS program shall seek to maintain the elder or dependent adult safely in their normal environment and by strengthening their capacity for self-maintenance. And that's this whole business, right, about the least restrictive intervention.
Right.
And the home is basically it. That's where most people want to stay and remain.
Well, because people really don't want to be going to care centers where they're so depressing and so don't promote that social interaction.
Many of them see it as the end of their life when they have to go to these places.
And they often make it the end of their life.
So the goals may be accomplished through direct provision, of course, of APS services or by linking the elder dependent adult with community-based resources. And you saw this particularly, right? I mean, it's very relevant in urban areas, but in the rural areas as well.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Sure. For my county, just having a senior center, an open senior center, was probably the premier community-based resource that we had.
You bet. So when we look at the scope of services, it appears that APS is responsible for providing services, of course, that actually safeguard the client. That's our goal. These are clients that include, of course, our resistive clients. In short-term case management is a problem with us with resistive clients. It often is. Why? Well, because a lot of our cases involve long-term problems, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And we're just not set up that way.
Yeah. So today we'll discuss ways in which we can begin to work with the resistance in the context of really short-term intervention, because we only have so many resources, we only have so many social workers, and we have only so much time as a result of that.
Again, moving forward on scope, adult protective services include response to reports of known or suspected abuse or neglect, investigations. I like to call them investigations assessments, because sometimes we're just assessing and not investigating.
I've heard it referred to as, and I was actually trained this way and taught, social work investigations.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great.
With a different perspective.
We're not cops.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Time-limited case management and arrangement for delivery of services. Oftentimes, we're just a conduit. Short-term patients are clients in a wheelchair, and they just need a ramp.
Right.
Easy in and out sort of thing. We look at emergency shelter in-home protection, actual tangible resources. We look at multidisciplinary personnel teams. And the Adult Protective Services Program is not intended to interfere with their lifestyle choices, right? And not to protect the individuals from all the consequences of their choices. So often, like we talked about in those case examples, how that creates sort of a cognitive dissonance between, what their choices are and that they're allowed to make those choices. An elder or dependent adult who has been abused, as defined in Section 33130A3, may refuse or withdraw consent at any time to preventative and remedial services offered by an adult protective services agency.
So if adult protective services worker believes that the elder is incapacitated to the extent that they're unable to give or deny consent to APS, of course, then that's when we take the most restrictive intervention, if you will. That's when we file for a conservatorship, either through the public guardian's office or in other communities, there are private conservators that can fulfill that role as well.
Of course.
So these, I think these concepts are really kind of like really at the heart of working with resistive clients. And that is, you as workers, keep in mind, of course, we know that our clients have the right to self-determination and they have the right to folly. They have the right to do stupid things, is what it amounts to. Although we wouldn't be, of course, labeling that. But they do some things we wonder. And so, but they have the right to do that as long as they're mentally competent, right? So there again, our role is to do at least an initial assessment to ascertain whether or not they are mentally competent, and then do the follow-up to confirm it. And then secondly, and/or is what it amounts to, are they being subjected to undue influence? Where they really don't have control, if you will, over what is going on because somebody is telling them what to do.
Right. Excellent.
So are there resistive clients that we're not going to change? Are there any of those in those categories? Well, clients with dementia, right? Probably not.
Probably not.
Yeah, because they're not cognitively intact, right, per se. Their judgment and reasoning are severely impaired. And probably when we get those cases, we're going to almost always go towards the conservatorship route, right? We also have mentally ill clients. So here we have a category of people that, LPS conservatorship oftentimes. They may be delusional. They may be paranoid. They may be having hallucinations. They're not currently taking their communication. So there's a lot of issues around impairment of judgment and so forth. So again, a more restrictive intervention. And then clients who are under the control of another person, which we just mentioned, are being unduly influenced, right, or brainwashed. So we may not be able to access that client. We may only have one chance. We might add that as well. In some situations with undue influence, you may only get one chance.
To plant a seed, right?
Yes, to plant a seed and to actually get some information, because the abuser will shut you down.
Right.
Yeah. You may be unable to see the client without, of course, the abuser being there. And then subsequently they'll refuse to see you, unfortunately.
So we're going to talk about how to engage resistive clients. The rest of the social work relationship is vital for working with involuntary clients, right?
Right.
So building positive relationships with resistive clients, number one, right? Do you see frequent changes in workers in your work environment? The more our clients frequent change of social worker, the less we're able to engage with that client, right? You're building trust, and then switching workers doesn't really help to maintain that trust. Striking a balance between exercising social work authority, empowering the client to control the process wherever possible. Giving practical assistance, for example, advocacy, helping clients to fight for their rights. Oftentimes that's a really, really good way to kind of get them on your side and move them forward. Paying attention to whatever is positive in the client's behavior and celebrating all achievements. Wow, you got out of the house today. You got on the transit. You know, you went shopping, or you let Meals on Wheels come in. Yay.
They may have never had that kind of feedback. Right? No one's ever told them that.
No. Yeah. So it's so important. Showing the client your humanity by finding a common interest. What calls to mind for me, I had the honor of being in a home with a lady who was a former Olympic water skier. So just listening to her stories and seeing her come alive, as strong as her dementia was just pretty humbling, actually. And when the relationship is broken down completely, independent mediation service may be worth exploring. Sometimes we just can't work with a client that maybe sets off some stuff in our own selves for maybe some trauma that we've had. So it's really to be honest about, wow, I just can't work with that particular client, and that's okay.
Yep.
That's
and also
okay.
Be creative in that. Be willing to consider all possibilities, right? Yeah.
Right.
It doesn't have to be me that makes the intervention work. It can be,
Yeah, so important.
Yeah. So building the trust is really the first step, right? So they're often mistrustful of social services, and some of them rightfully so. So building trust is, even in a very small scale, can start to really overcome that individual's fear of us, the big government agency coming in. We have all this power. Perceived power is really what it is. But they think we have the power. Trust can be built on simple things, like being consistent with clients, sticking to your word. If you say you're going to do something, make sure you do it. Being honest and upfront, if you will, about the situation and why adult services is involved. And then if you make a mistake, and of course none of you make mistakes, I know that, but if you do, apologize, right? Let them know, be honest, be real about it. And this does not mean that clients should feel that they can trust you with their secrets or always be on their side. It just means that they can trust you, and or you can work collaboratively together as a team, if you will.
Tenacity is essential in working with resistive clients. This really came to mind when I was a supervisor, and the workers would come back and have consistent referrals on just one client over and over and over again. So we really got involved in solution-focused questions. One like, if your son or daughter were here right now, what do you think they'd be worried about? So really trying to break through that resistance. And oftentimes people will sort of they don't disclose about themselves, but they definitely kind of shifts their thinking and saying, oh, well, yeah, the neighbor or my daughter or my son would be worried about this.
Yeah.
And so just really important to do that. Acknowledging their circumstances and understanding their histories, listening to their experiences. Again, I am so blown away when I was in practice about individual stories.
Right.
And if you really want to hear them, they'll tell them to you.
Yeah, sure. And that makes the work so interesting for us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, it's incredible to me.
Yeah.
Trust and respect develop over the long term. You're not going to go to a house, especially if any of this stuff is happening, and they're going to say, "Hey, come on in my house," and you will every once in a while. And those people are characters, right? But trust can be built by simple things like consistency, like Larry said, sticking to your work, admitting when you make a mistake, and building on the smallest thing. What do you need right now? What's one thing that you need right now? I need my hot water, or whatever it might be. But if it's an easy fix, it's a great way to engage with a client because they're testing you. Right?
Yeah, and you're establishing trust with them.
Right.
If you follow through on that small thing, they're going to trust you with the larger things.
And don't try to get in the door on a pretense.
Yeah.
I'm here because I and maybe somebody else are really worried about your safety. That's why we're here, and we need to make sure you're safe.
Right.
Right?
Exactly.
And too much information can be unhelpful as well, and because you don't want to overwhelm the client.
People get confused with that sometimes.
Well, especially if there's, again, maybe a second language learner,
right.
And all of that really gets into the mix, right?
Mm-hmm. So, of course, communication and safety are a large part of it. Some resistive clients struggle to understand what is happening, and so there's, they can literally push you away. So engagement can be improved, if you will, by making it clear at every contact what the purpose of your being there is all about, so that there's no question in the individual's mind. It may be helpful to stick to a simple, if you will, you mentioned this, a clear message, and repeat it consistently. So I'm here because we're worried about your safety. We need to make sure you are safe. And then you might expand on that, depending on what the individual circumstances is, if you will. And make sure that the client understands that. That's why you're there. And empathy, of course, is crucial. Empathy and compassion is crucial for maintaining engagement, if you will, with difficult clients and ones that are resistive. Avoid the jargon, right? All the acronyms that we come up with. It's like, it's difficult for them to remember what program you're from alone if you spell it out, but if you start using alphabet soup, it's very confusing.
There's strong emotional resistance, right? If your client or family's member needs care, he or she is dealing with some sort of loss, whether it's physical, mental, or the loss of independence. So, and even for us as social workers, switching roles with elder parents is so difficult. It's full of guilt and anxiety provoking, right?
Yeah.
A family, this is so incredibly hard. Those of you that have gone through it in your personal lives, a family member who has decided that their parent or close relative has to be placed.
Yeah.
Even when you take their driver's license away, right?
Oh, that's a big one.
A huge one.
Yeah.
And they feel tremendous guilt. It's their parents for, it's their parents they're doing this to. And they may be looking for someone else to blame. So, and I never minded being the bad guy if I had to for a family, is to say, we want you to keep your license, but this social worker over here is saying that you just can't do that, Dad. So clients may be playing out scripts not even maybe playing out scripts. We're all playing out scripts in our lives, right, that we've learned earlier. And it can help to ask what is the context that people are behaving in rather than taking behavior at face value. Somebody's angry at us, maybe they're fearful, right? So you want to look and see what's behind that behavior and not take it personal, right? It may be helpful too to consider what aspects of hostility are personal. Again, checking in with your own biases around your reaction to that person and maybe judgments around their behavior. And sort of check that at the door, and that's the only way you're going to be able to connect with that person.
We look again at the factors that are unique to each client. So, like what their resistant behavior, what function does that serve for them? I mean, we're asking that. And how does the client current resistance, if you will, fit into the way they have always been, and the way they've dealt with issues that came up, especially if it involves change, and what might be some of the idiosyncratic beliefs that they have. I think you'll see this as part of the theory actually around hoarding. Mm-hmm. There's some belief about those things they're acquiring, and what fears do they have? Are they afraid you're gonna place them, or you're gonna do something to them? What are they?
Well, especially if their undue influence person is telling them that's exactly what we're here for.
Exactly. So how might the client be misunderstanding or misinterpreting, what we're saying? So it's good to check in with them. What did you hear? What did you hear me saying?
Yeah.
And what skills does the client lack that might be practically difficult or impossible at this point for them? And then lastly, what factors in the client's environment that may be working against them, may be actually punishing them, in some way?
So we hope this was helpful for you. Again, I think it's a different way to look at the context in which resistive clients happen, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, we've really enjoyed being with you, and we hope that this video will serve a value to you. Take care.
Thanks.